Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third of our In Detail webinar series celebrating RIAS Special Category Award winners for 2024. My name's Tamsie Thomson, and I'm going to be your chair this lunchtime. During our first two sessions, we had excellent presentations by architect James Brimble on the Page and Park Northgate social housing, and then in the second session from Ben Addy from Moxon Architects on Arduk, his own home. This week, we're delighted to be joined by Katherine Watts, architect at John McAslan Partners, who'll be giving us an insight into the renovation of the Burrell Collection. The Burrell was this year's winner of the Architecture Heritage Award, and so we're also very pleased to be joined today by Richard Willams, the Senior Architectural Development Manager at Velux, who so generously sponsored this award. Just some notes before we begin. This session will be recorded and will be shared afterwards. And there is a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So please use this to submit any questions that you had throughout today's session, and we'll come to those at the end. I will now hand over to Richard, who will give us a talk on Velux sponsorship of the Architecture Heritage Award and their support of RIAS and why this award is important to them. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Tamsie, and thank you everybody who's given up their valued time to attend. My name is Richard Willams. I'm based in Tynemouth, as you can see here, and this is one example of a case study that we have developed within Heritage. I'm just going to give you a very brief overview, next 3 to 4 minutes, on 3 main things. One, that our organisation. The second thing will be that our purpose. And thirdly, as Tamsie said, why we support RIAS. Well, the company, the Velux Group, is owned by VKR Holdings. It's a limited company owned by a foundation and also the family. It was founded back in 1941, and the first window was put into a school, and it's a Danish organization. The VE comes from ventilation and Lux from light. Within 37 countries, we have sales companies throughout the world, and there are 21 production companies throughout 12 different countries, and we have just under 12,000 employees globally, 11,900. I think what's important when I mentioned about the foundation, 90% of the profit the organization make are put back into the community. And the Velux Foundation have a broad non-profit aim and support various columns. One is scientific, another is artistic, a third one is cultural, environmental and social purposes. And one example of this, when the fire happened in Notre Dame, they approached the foundation and we supported financially some of that renovation for that. So the second area I was saying was our purpose. Well, our purpose within our organization, Velux, is to create well-being for people and planet by transforming spaces using natural daylight and fresh air. And why is this so important to ourselves? Well, we are currently living in the indoor generation. We spend 90% of our life indoors. If you look at another way, we only spend 2 hours 40 outside, or another way, a 50-year-old would have spent 45 years within a building. And that's why natural daylight and ventilation is important. So coming into the third aspect, the heritage, and why we supported this and so proud to do so, one of our key goals is continuous development. And that is both within product and also processes. So with a new heritage product we launched last year, we spent 6 years developing this, the new heritage window, in conjunction with fellow architects and conservation officers. And this is showcased in one of our 2 current CPDs that we won. So why we're supporting RIAS? Well, we've been more distant than we'd like to have been within in recent years, and want to re-engage with architects in the architects fraternity. As I mentioned, we've developed more products, processes, and services, including things like daylight visualizers, as well as designing and building a new concept called Living Places, which is our response to the housing of the future, which is essentially reducing the carbon emissions. So by supporting the Heritage Award this year, allowed us to do 2 main things. One, allowed us to re-engage and amplify the well-received product that's been created and also specified by many. And also it highlights and amplifies the retrofit program, which is huge and growing, being respect for the past and mindful of the future, thus supporting the heritage and conservation products. So we wish to continue to support RIAS for the future and use this platform to communicate even more continuous developments within our organization. So thank you so much indeed. And we look forward to listening to Katherine's presentation.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you very much for your ongoing support. Now I'm going to hand over to Katherine Watts. Before I do, Katherine is an accredited conservation architect, and she leads the historic buildings team at John McAslan Partners. She was involved in the Burrell Renaissance project from 2015 until 2022, as well as many other old and I think new projects over the last 3 years, such as King's Cross Station and St Albans Museum. She's currently also working on the project to revitalise George Square in Glasgow. So I'm sure we're going to see and hear much more of Katherine in the future as well. But for today, Katherine, over to you to hear more about the Burrell.
Thank you very much, Tamsie. Let me just share my screen. Full screen mode, that's it. I hope everybody can see that.
Brilliant, yep, thank you.
Oops, sorry. Okay, so this is Sir William Burrell. He amassed a great fortune in the height of the Industrial Revolution as a shipping magnate. He spent a considerable amount of this fortune on amassing an enormous art collection of some 9,000 objects. He gifted the entire collection to the city of Glasgow in 1944, which was an amazing gift. He also gifted money to go with that. He also, alongside this gift, he made some stipulations of how the money should be spent. He said that a museum should be purpose-built to house the collection and to display it as if it would be in a private house. Indeed, the rooms at his home in Hutton Castle should be replicated as much as possible. So that image is on the right is inside Hutton Castle. He also stipulated that the collection should be at least housed at least 16 miles from the centre of Glasgow due to the high levels of pollution at the time. So this slide shows you a few of the examples of the Burrell collection. It's an amazingly wide-ranging collection with some really beautiful objects recognizable across the world, many of them. So it's a combination of ranging from medieval, Islamic, Chinese, Egyptian and French Impressionist, as you can see there, and consists of paintings, sculptures, stained glass, tapestries, furniture, and even building fabric, big building fragments, which he some of which were built into the to the new building when it was opened. So alongside this, the Maxwell MacDonald family gifted Pollock House and the 360 acres of Pollock Estate to the city of Glasgow in 1967. So this park is only 3 miles from the city centre of Glasgow, but it was seen as an appropriate place for the Burrell collection to be housed due to the fact that the pollution levels had dropped considerably and the air was seen not to be damaging to the artworks. So in 1972, there was an international competition held to design the new museum. It was won by 3 architects from Cambridge University: Barry Gasson, John Murnier, and Britt Anderson. And this slide shows some of the competition diagrams, which show some of their kind of early concept ideas. So just pointing out a few of them, one of the key moves was the siting of the museum against the trees, using the shade of the woodland to make a really really beautiful gallery where the art can be seen in nature. They thought carefully about the entrance sequence and the circulation around the building, and they also considered the way that the Hutton rooms, and these are the replication rooms from Hutton Castle, these 3 rooms that are clustered around a kind of semi-indoor, semi-outdoor courtyard, and then the circulation as it was designed through the building. And then this other last diagram shows how the building could be used out of hours by shutting off the main gallery spaces and using the front southern part of the building for out of hours events. And these are some of the competition drawings and the competition model. So the top right, you can see the Walk in the Woods gallery where the trees are sited behind the artworks, and also if anyone's visited it, the building, you can see that is really how it looks now. It hasn't, from the competition entry to the current building, it really hasn't changed very much. And then at the bottom you can see that sort of clever move of pushing what is a actually really large building into the corner of the site, so it doesn't take up nearly as much of the park as it could do. So the museum opened to wide public acclaim in 1983, and these are some of the opening photographs. 30 years, almost to the day after it was opened, it was listed at category A, and this is an amazing achievement for a modern building to be listed on roughly its 30th birthday, which is the earliest time that a building can be listed, and also to be listed at category A, which is the highest category. And it shows how important this building is in the architectural world, and how it is valued. The opening of the building, just to go back a little bit, was also, it kind of marked a key turning point for Glasgow, a turning point from a sort of failing industrial city into what is now, well, it's now fully become a cultural city. So this slide shows some of the architectural fragments which were built into the Gasson design. And also it is quite interesting to just look at some of the context of the context that the Burrell building was built in. So this shows some other museum buildings which were built around the same time. So varying architectural styles, but you can see some echoes of the Burrell Collection. What I think is probably most interesting is the comparison with the Louisiana Museum in Copenhagen. So this museum was a little bit earlier, but it was also, it was one of the precedents that the architects used as in the inspiration of the Burrell Collection. And you can really see that similar idea of the large glass windows with the nature behind. So you're always seeing the art with the nature as a backdrop. So then if we fast forward to 2015, and whilst it was still obviously listed and of great value, there were a number of problems associated with the building. the first photograph on the left shows you one of the biggest one, which was the building fabric was failing, the roof fabric was failing, and water was coming into the building. And obviously, with such an important collection, this is obviously not acceptable, and it jeopardized the. I mean, you know, obviously one of the most significant things about the building was the fact that it's a purpose-built museum for a collection. So the two are kind of very closely linked together. And if the building starts to fail, the collection, you know, there was potentially a danger that the collection would have to go elsewhere. So anyway, so that was a fundamental one which needed to be addressed. The entrance, whilst architecturally very interesting, it was seen as a barrier to people entering the museum. Perhaps us as architects would have gone in readily, but maybe people who were less familiar with the I don't know, the idea of visiting a museum, it's maybe a little bit of a barrier, and certainly the client were very keen that we address that issue. That the third photograph shows the roof, the leaking roof, the flat roofs. I mean, they were built. They were built out of standing seam stainless steel, but they were not laid to a fall at all. And as I expect people on this call know, that you know, you need to have a shallow pitch at least on a standing seam roof, and it turned out that the standing seams were actually kind of sucking the water in with the thermal movement in the building, that the water was actually being sucked into the fabric of the building. So that needed to be addressed. The services were at the end of their design life. They needed to be replaced. The collection, the presentation of the artwork was tired, and it was not really flexible enough for changing over. Another, well, this is more of an opportunity than a problem, but in the middle of the building there was a lecture theatre, which you know, whilst useful for the odd evening lecture, it was most of the time it was a kind of black box in the middle of the building and kind of blocking circulation through. So we saw that as an opportunity. And then apart from that, then the retail offer needed revitalization and you know, making more prominent, more you know, it's obviously very important for the client to be able to have the ongoing revenue generation. So these slides show some of our visualizations for the project. So on the left, this is the removal and replacement of the lecture theatre. So what we did is we took out the lecture theatre and we made it into a sort of central agora, which, as well as being able to be a lecture theatre, it's also an orientation point. So you can kind of see the kind of axes through the building. You can circulate on all three floors, and it basically links the building rather than divides it, which is what it used to do. And then you can also see in top right the new entrance. This is a little bit controversial at the time, trying to get the listed building consent for it, but I think it's turned out to be relatively you know, it doesn't really change the look of the building overly, and it can be used alongside the old entrance. And I think that the client has found that it's roughly 50-50 people who use the new and the old entrance. You can see the Walk in the Woods gallery down bottom left, which really hasn't changed. There was a lot of work carried out in the building in order to in this area in the building in order to make the you know, to represent the collection. The display cases were upgraded, and all of the, you know, the services changed but the end result is it really looks very similar to the previous design. And then obviously the landscape was updated. So there's the plan showing the landscape. So we've paved some additional areas. We've added other entrances. So we've got the main entrance here. There's also another entrance so that this so the cafe has more of a link to the park, so that people can come in and out of the cafe and potentially be attracted to visiting the museum as well. So this shows you the way that the lecture theatre was replaced by the orientation hub, the Agora, as we call it. So you can see that the kind of, you know, the views into the building, sorry, the views into the lecture theatre and like through it acts both horizontally and vertically. It kind of links the three public floors in the building. And there's some construction photographs showing on the left the landscape works, and then on the right the Agora being constructed. And here you can see the completed building on the left. You can see the replaced roof. So we got listed building consent to replace the stainless steel with a membrane roof, which quite often the conservation bodies don't really like that because it sets a precedent. But because of the sort of fundamental flaw in having these flat roofs as standing seam stainless steel, it just didn't really work. So if we'd, you know, gone down the route of keeping the stainless steel, we would have ended up actually changing the profile of the roofs in order to make it possible to keep the collection in the building. So that was seen as more fundamental than keeping the stainless steel to keep the collection in the building. You can also see the vast array of photovoltaics that we put on the roof there, and you can see the landscape works around. There was also there was quite a significant upgrade to the building envelope. All of the glass was replaced. This was replaced with some more modern solar control glass. So it has meant, you know, each elevation has a different kind of glass on it. It's meant, so, you know, the south elevation obviously receives a lot of sunlight, the north less so. But what it's meant is that the blinds are no longer needed, and they perform, it's much more airtight and it's much more insulating. So I'll come on to the kind of carbon story in a little bit, but that's quite considerable. And then this shows you the before and after, which also shows actually kind of how little it's changed, as well as how much it's changed. So here we are. This is the carbon slide. So you can see that there was, by upgrading the envelope and introducing the PVs, there was an enormous improvement in performance of the building. We also managed to achieve BREEAM Excellent, which in a Category A building is quite a big achievement. And there you can see the facades, the replaced glass, and it was all done kind of respecting the new, reusing the old curtain walling at the stainless steel members on capping members, and just doing it with kind of very respectful attitude towards the way that it previously looked. And there's a slightly wider view, so you can see the new entrances there. And another one there. Evening shot. So that shows you on the left, it shows you the new entrance, where we have removed one of the old Hutton rooms. The Hutton rooms were kind of, whilst they were part of the original brief requirement for Gaston's design, they were also not very well visited. So it was seen as an opportunity to kind of make them, you know, revitalize the museum, to use those spaces in a more kind of modernize them and just rejig the exhibition so that it became more attractive to visitors. And then on the left, you can see the older entrance where there's now a little cafe, and it takes you through into the courtyard. So that space has not really been changed apart from adding the cafe. So this is the refurbished courtyard, and you can see the windows to the Hutton room there, and the entrance through the Hornby portal into the Walk in the Woods gallery. That shows you the replaced glass on the entrance sequence, the old entrance sequence. And the Walk in the Woods gallery before and after shots, so you can see it hasn't really changed. It's just been made more functional. And this one's quite interesting because you know, a sunny day in the previous building, not previous building, the before the works, you can see that it was necessary to have all the blinds down to protect the artifacts from sunlight, whereas now the glass is doing that work. And I like to think that although we've kind of changed a lot, we've actually made it closer to Gaston's original design intent. And that shows you the Agora, which can be used as a lecture theatre, and then the old lecture theatre. And you can see how it sort of links through to the other spaces within the museum. That's some other shots. Oh yeah, one of the other things I haven't mentioned is that part of our brief was to open up the collection as much as possible. So this is a window onto the into the stores, the museum stores. I think they're open now. They're open once a month, so you can actually go into the stores. But also, there's these glass which has a presentation onto the glass, which you can see there. But periodically, that will turn off, and you'll see into the collection stores. So it was about much more opening up the museum as much as possible and making all of the exhibits available to a certain extent. And then this shows you some of the refurbished galleries. This is along the south part of the building, so it's less suitable for artworks because it gets a lot of sunlight through the large glazed windows. The move was made so that we put the main shop in that location, and I think that works quite well because it's near to the entrance and the exit, and it's a much more sophisticated shop offering than previously. And there you can see the south elevation, which has got the stained glass all along that elevation. So that's the end of my talk.
Thank you ever so much, Katherine. A good whistle-stop tour, and I think I would definitely recommend anyone who hasn't been there since the work to go back. It's well worth the time and the visit. And I have to say, as someone who went to study it for my part one, one of my first study trips, it was really interesting to go back as part of the award visits. I just wondered if we could start by kind of reflecting on what you think are the sort of the big successes in terms of the interventions you've made into the building.
Well, I like to think that we haven't ruined it, because obviously that was being category A
Always a risk.
building. Yeah, it's always a risk. Yeah, so that was obviously right up there with the things that we had to achieve. I think that, you know, having the orientation, because some of the sort of circulation in the building previously, you know, the client found that people never quite got to that far corner of the building, because they'd sort of, I don't know, somehow bypass it and end up in the cafe before they saw many of the exhibitions. So I think whilst McAslan and his team had kind of really thought about that sort of sequence of the museum, I think that in actual use, for some reason, people kind of tended to bypass part of the exhibition. So so that kind of, I think by putting in the agora, which helps people to understand the layout, I think that does help the museum circulation. And then there was a few walls which were kind of swapped around, which redirected people into different directions a little bit. And I think they are finding now that people kind of go around with the whole thing a bit better. And yeah, and obviously another massive success story was the envelope upgrade, and how we've managed to make the running costs much less for the client, make it much more suitable for the you know, the artifacts to be displayed. Both the room, the envelope obviously affects all the inside of the building, but there's also then the display cases which have been upgraded, so they're much more suitable, they're much more accessible, and suitable in terms of the museological standards that the artifacts are kept in, and then accessible in terms of the reflection of the glass and the sort of interpretation. The heights they're displayed at have been changed so that people in wheelchairs can see things better. Yeah, a lot of that kind of stuff has been addressed.
And it seems to me, and you can welcome to disagree, but the sort of the two biggest architectural moves are the entrance, the new entrance arrangement, and the opening up of that agora space, as you refer to it. And I suppose they're potentially controversial in terms of people who are used to the existing building. I wondered what the sort of client feedback and user feedback generally you'd received as a practice, and your kind of feelings on it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of controversy about the new entrance, because it's obviously a significant change. I mean, you know, in some ways it was a shame to sort of bypass that entrance, because it was such an important part of the original design. But I mean, we haven't lost that, and we just supplemented it with the other entrance. So I mean, my view is, you know, I want to go in through the old entrance still. I like that architectural experience of entering through the old entrance, but in terms of the way that the client wanted to use the building, they just needed that direct access, you know, into the building, to make it more attractive to visitors. And you know, I can understand that, and I think that it doesn't make too much impact on the facade. I don't think much has been lost by changing the entrance. I I don't know whether you agree, but
well, I think certainly our experience on the awards visit was that actually we entered through one and exited through the other. So it
Okay.
actually, I think for our experience, it improved the flow of the building. So it kind
it's
of,
quite narrow, that the old entrance, isn't it? So if you've got people going in and out.
yeah.
And
the Agora space.
The Agora space. Well, it's certainly that. I mean, functionally, it works so much better having that space as an open lecture theatre, which orientates. I think it. I mean that. Definitely, it just functions so much better. It's made the whole orientation of when you're in the gallery and understanding the layout works so much better. I mean, I don't think the lecture, it was original. And one of the issues we had, which I didn't really mention, was that, when we came to the building, we were carrying out the first refurbishment that a Category A building had ever had. So, like, everything we looked at was original gas-on architecture. So it's, my conservation instincts was like, oh my goodness, how do you say this is more significant than that? It's all completely original. Normally when you go to a building, you say, right, we'll get rid of that 60s rubbish, and we'll strip it back to how it was, kind of thing. But we started with how it was, and we had to make changes in order to make it function better. So that it was a challenge, but I'm relatively happy with the result, I think.
Yeah, I think it certainly, again, when we were there, it was actually being used as a kind of informal play space, because I think we were perhaps in the holidays, or which was very nice to see, and it felt like it gave a kind of space to the plan at that point, which I think the original sort of big block perhaps kind of blocked it and created a series that was more corridor-like, that
definitely
has opened up. And what kind of reaction have the users given to the new building? Do you know what the sort of visitor response has been?
The clients are thrilled, unless they're saying something they're not saying to us. I think they're generally really pleased with it. I mean, that their visitor numbers are, have soared. I mean, prior to the closure, the visitor numbers have been dwindling just because the issues and the tiredness of it, and since then, the visitor numbers have soared. They've had other awards for they won Museum of the Year last year, and they're very happy with it.
We've had a question come in from one of our audience, I have to say, a member of RIAS staff, Stuart Hay. He's asking how nervous you were about entering into conversations about putting things like PV panels on a Category A listed building. How did you convince them? How did you secure the consent?
Well, it was. I mean, I think it's partly because they're hidden. You've got the maybe what I didn't mention is whilst we got the consent to change the membrane roof, we kept all of the visible roofs in the stainless steel, and the PV panels are hidden. And I think it's putting together a proposal that addresses modern issues such as sustainability without damaging the listed building. Obviously the PV panels could be removed, but also in the meantime, they're not visible apart from that aerial shot I showed you. So it was accepted because of that, and I think that was the correct decision, because obviously where we can save carbon, that it's a very important thing to do. And yeah, I don't think there's any way you can see the photovoltaic panels from the ground.
And were there other areas where securing consent for what you wanted to do was difficult, or were there some things that you kind of didn't ask for because you didn't think you'd get, or how did that kind of conversation go? Were there tricky areas?
I think, well, yeah, somehow it was strange. It wasn't really the listed building consent that was too much of an issue. I mean, there was obviously we had a number of presentations to them, and we talked it through and altered the design, you know, to suit them where we had to. But I think it was more some of the, you know, we actually got listed building consent, and then there was the controversial press debate about the entrance. So it was kind of, we'd actually already got listed building consent at that point. So in some ways we were in a relatively strong position, but obviously we didn't, you know, want to upset people. But so we then spent a while justifying it to, you know, to the original architects and you know, the wider community, that this was the right thing to do. And I don't know if to this day everybody agrees, but you know, we do what we can.
And aside from that, were there any sort of difficult conversations with the planners, or was that a kind of consensual, agreeable conversation?
There were extensive conversations with the planners, and yeah, but I don't think there was anything. I don't think there was anything. You know, we obviously had to justify it, but I don't think there was anything particularly. I mean, I think we did have to justify. We spent a lot of time justifying the replacement of the roof membrane, the change of material there, and we had to show some details and, you know, why it wouldn't work by replacing it with stainless steel, because obviously, you know, the minimum pitch for stainless steel would have been 5 degrees, and then, you know, so that would have had, you know, and on such a large roof, that has quite an impact on the, you know, it had an impact on the pitched parts of the roofs, and it would have become visible. So that justification, we obviously put a lot of effort into showing how it was the best way to go forward to protect the collection and to not damage the listed building. Yeah.
And I suppose as a conservation architect, it's a potentially quite a different challenge when you're dealing with something like the Burrell, perhaps, to some of the other buildings you've worked on. I wondered, with your kind of conservation hat on, when you were first
yeah, well, I kind of explained that, you know, that first getting to the building and thinking, you know, there's no parts of the building that have been ruined already that we can rectify. It was the original. I mean, I think they'd refurbished a couple of the sets of toilets, so those are obvious ones. But, you know, when we prepared the significance plans, it was like red, all red, all high significance. You know, it was all original. Difficult to know how to approach it in that way, but because of that kind of and so we had to kind of start thinking about it in another way, where it's like, well, what's more fundamentally significant to the building is the fact that it was designed to house the collection, and if it can't do that in a satisfactory way, then that's obviously a fundamental flaw, and then we have to address that. So that was that was our way in. It was to address those fundamental questions which sort of overrode the fact that everything was original. Whereas normally, you know, in a building, you kind of, yeah, you're kind of clearing out some modern clutter, and in an older building generally had changes made already, and you're kind of clearing it out, or kind of you can make arguments that you're going back to how it was originally intended for. I mean, I was thinking of King's Cross, you know, we ended up with that, with the concourse on the west side of the building, and our argument to the conservation officer in Historic England there was, you know, well, we're reinstating the entrance from the west, which was where it was always intended to be from. And I mean, obviously it was a bigger story, but you can kind of use those, we're putting it back to how it was type of arguments rather than we're changing it.
Yeah. And kind of looking back, are there things that you feel the sort of arguments lost, or things that you wished now you go back and tweak further? What's your kind of feeling now on the kind of completed building? Because there's always a temptation, isn't there, to sort of fine tune something here or there.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to pick holes in things. Destroying other people's careers, but there's obviously some things that in execution maybe didn't turn out quite as good, and sometimes the budget constrains you a little bit, but that's just reality that you have to deal with.
Yeah, and it was a pretty tight budget considering what
it was a very
to
tight budget.
Yeah.
When you compare the budget per square meter compared to some other comparable museum, like, I can't remember the number, refurbishments, I can't remember the numbers, but it's a fraction that that our budget was. So for that, for the budget, I think it's been a big success, definitely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. I don't know if anyone else from our audience has any further final questions that they would like to ask. I'll give a minute or two for them to add any. But while they're doing that, I wondered if you, on a lighter note, whether there was any kind of part of the collection that you were particularly interested, if you had a favourite part of the building or the collection, or how you kind of view that collection, because I think, as I understand it, quite a lot of work has been done on the curation and the bringing of that back to life, and as you said, more accessible as well.
Yeah, from my point of view, from me, what I like is the fact that it's the collection of one man. So he's kind of collected from such a wide range of sources.
He had eclectic taste, didn't he?
A very eclectic taste, and some of these things he probably bought them, well, definitely cheaper than they would have been now. But he's got all these amazing Cézannes, other French Impressionists, and all of this stuff. And he kind of stops there, obviously, because I don't think he valued really modern art. So he kind of stops, I think, roughly at the Impressionists, or a bit later than that. From my point of view, I also really enjoy the Chinese stuff. I've done a lot of travel in China, and to see that, but to see it, alongside all of the other stuff, I think it's really interesting. But I think maybe from children and other people's point of view, potentially it's much more accessible. There's buttons you can press. There's kind of moving images, and I think it kind of draws certainly younger people in much more than just seeing the sort of slightly drier pictures on the walls and other artifacts where there's not so much context or interpretation given. Yeah,
certainly my kids like the swords display on the wall. That was the thing they came away remembering. Thank you. I've actually just had a quick question. I don't know if you have the answer. If not, we can probably go back, which is, do you know what company provided the solar glazing?
No, I don't.
If not, we can come back with that one.
Yeah, we've probably got it buried in some specification somewhere.
And another quite technical question, just testing you at the end, which is, why is there no draft lobby in the new entrance?
Well, there's a semi-draft lobby. That the converted Hutton room sort of acts as a draft lobby, and there's also a sort of screen above. I think I don't know 100% what the answer to this is, but I think the way that the space is configured, there's a sort of the semi-draft lobby, and then there's also the whole of the courtyard, which is obviously not one of the gallery spaces. So I think it's the way that the circulation works in that area.
Thank you.
That's about as technical as I can get on that one.
We'll leave that one there. Thank you ever so much.
Okay.
Well, thank you ever so much for your time. We really appreciate you giving up your lunch to come and talk about the building. My colleague Joe has, for attendees, put in the chat, if anyone's interested, some sign-up details for the forthcoming In Detail series. We are looking at all the buildings that have won special awards this year. And I think the events that have happened so far, the Moxon and the Page Park, will be available online for people to go back and view if you're interested in those. So thank you ever so much, Katherine. I would say we are also going to be later in the summer announcing our Doolan shortlist, which is the next stage of the RIAS Awards. So everyone do look out for that, and we're on to the next stage of that process. But thank you very much for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.